Gabor. Hi, welcome everyone to DrupalCafé session 3 in 2019. I'm Safe, I'm a full stack developer working with Gabor. And this time we're gonna talk about serverless and Docker4Drupal. And our first speaker will be Robert Slootjes from Mediamonks. He is a beer noob and a gamer dad. He will talk about the concept of serverless architecture. And the second speaker tonight is Gabor Meszaros. I'm trying. From OneShoe, he's a tech enthusiast, have a Drupal developer and innovation in his main focus. He will talk about how to set up a Drupal multisite with wodby Docker images. That's cool. So let's start with our first speaker, Robert. It's your time. Thank you.
All right, thanks for the introduction. Am I live?
Yes, you're live.
All right, very good. For the record, I'm a beer snob, not a beer noob. It's a big difference. I will talk a lot about beer during the presentation as well. All right, so everyone, this is into serverless architecture for DrupalCafé. So the topics I want to talk about cloud computing, then dive into so you know me, I'm the director. We do everything in the world. And availability events, which is you're not in. Time to move away. Very interesting. Cloud computing. Oops. Some of you, I think, all service and also part of cloud. And there is no cloud, it's a thing, and I with that. Yes, it is someone's hostnet, it's not but you can computer. It's a part of an entire infrastructure that will take care of you even know. It's fair to say it's
Let's try it.
all right. Hopefully this is better.
Yeah, antenna didn't catch.
Okay, very good. So I think everyone's using cloud storage, something like S3 or maybe Google Drive. And of course, there's also databases in the cloud, like RDS for Amazon, just MySQL in the cloud, or Postgres, whatever you need. And there's basically anything in the cloud. There's a service for everything. So you also have queues and streams. Everything is there. So what I'm talking about today would be functions in the cloud, or otherwise known as functions as a service. And I think a lot of people are familiar with containers, and also this is something that Gabor will touch in the next presentation, and about VMs, virtual machines. And I want to point out what the difference is between VMs, containers, and functions. And at most points, VMs and containers are kind of the same. Like containers have much less overhead than VMs, but generally they are the same. Containers are and VMs are stateful, so you can run them for a long period of time. And you can easily just shove your container in another provider. So you can just take your Docker container and take it somewhere else. And with functions, this is a way more difficult, because if you're creating a function in Go, then Amazon Lambda can run it, but Google Functions cannot, because they do not support Go. So there's a problem of vendor lock-in there. Also for functions, there's no provisioning. Provide a piece of code and that's it. And you pay for exact usage only. So if your service doesn't run, you don't pay anything, which is great. And also functions are auto-scaling. So whenever you need one instance, one invoke of a function or 1,000, the platform will manage it all for you automatically. You don't have to worry about any of that. And with VMs or containers, there's a lot of tools to do this, but it won't be automatic. You would have to set up some kind of tool to make sure that everything is running as it should and that it scales up when needed. So I think that functions as a service add a certain spark to the cloud. It makes it a lot more exciting. So serverless, of course, it doesn't mean that there's no servers involved. It's a misnomer. Of course there's servers. The code needs to run somewhere, right? And because it's very difficult to find like a definition of what serverless actually is, I found a few quotes of people that know a lot about this. And I think that Amazon is one of the first providers that came up with this, with their service Lambda. And they say that service compute allows you to build and run application services without thinking about servers. Or the creators of the serverless framework, they say what serverless really means is that as a developer, you don't have to think about those servers. You just focus on code. And the founder of Serverless Days says a serverless solution is one that costs you nothing if no one is using it. Or serverless is about extracting users away from servers. Instead, developers make use of single-purpose services and elastic compute platforms to execute code. So what does it mean? How to put it? Basically, it means there's no servers to manage or provision. It auto-scales based on load, and the cost is based on precise usage. And also, by default, it's high available and it's fault tolerant. So if there's anything broken, there's a server breaking, you don't need to worry. They will solve it for you. But what problem does serverless solve? Why is it there? Well, it's very helpful to handle inconsistent traffic. Like if you have a site, then you don't know if there will be one visitor or 20,000, or there will be spikes, maybe because someone is running a media campaign, then this can be very helpful. Also, you only pay for what you need. So if the service is not running, no one is using it, you're not paying for anything. So you don't have to pay hundreds or thousands of euros a month just to have the infrastructure there available for someone that may use it. Also, there's no maintenance required. They manage all the hardware, they manage the operating systems, they manage the language runtimes, make sure that patches are installed. You only focus on code. There's a lot of providers that support doing serverless. I have most experience with Amazon and Google, but also there's Azure and OpenWhisk, and you can also run this with your own servers. So there's tools to also run serverless on your own on-premise, if you would want that. What's important to know that with VMs and containers, usually you expose some kind of port, like usually it's port 80 or 443 that you access the web service on. With functions, this is not there. You need to invoke the code point. And there's different ways to do this. So there's push-based, and those are and for instance, this is an HTTP call. So at Amazon, you can use API Gateway and create an endpoint and then match it to a Lambda function. And then it will execute and it will wait for a response. Also, chatbots are using this a lot. So just small functions doing one thing, and the chatbot uses the input directly. Or authentication, whenever you want to authenticate someone, you want to verify their token or their credentials. This is also something that's synchronous. Then there's event-based. this is really interesting to use. It's asynchronous, so it will just call it, and you don't have to return anything. And this is very helpful with storage. For instance, if you add a file to a bucket on S3, or a file is deleted, you can act on that. Or whenever there's database changes, you can also act on those. Receiving email, instead of setting up email boxes and having scripts polling for this, you can also attach a Lambda function to an incoming email and respond immediately, or add it to some other queue. Or cron, you can use, at Amazon, you can use CloudWatch to set up a cron and call a function periodically. Or whenever a resource state changes in your system, like a lot of companies are using this whenever they are creating a server. They are using lambdas to verify that the server is secure, that it doesn't have open ports, for instance. And when it does, they immediately shut down the server automatically. It's very helpful. And they're also poll-based, and you can use this with queues or streams, like Kinesis, for instance. Queues would be simple queuing servers on Amazon. But streams are for Kinesis or Kinesis Firehose, where you can just put massive amount of data in and Lambda function to it, and it will run the function for every entry in the stream. And also databases. Some databases like DynamoDB on Amazon, they support attaching a Lambda function to every change that's happening in your database. But you can also run it manually. So if you have a piece of code, you can just call the function manually, and you can decide for yourself if you want to have it synchronously or asynchronously. Okay, this is interesting, but what can you actually do with this? So I think for me personally, this is a really big thing, static websites. You can all run static websites without having a server in the air. You can just use functions. APIs and microservices, also something you could do with functions. Content processing, you can, for instance, have a user put in some piece of data on your site, and you might want to auto-translate this data. So you just have a function taking care of getting all the translations from, let's say, Google Translate, and automatically translate all the content on your website. Like if someone places a review and someone requests it in a different language, then you have it available. This is also what Google is doing themselves in the review system. Video rendering. This is a case I will come back to later, but this is really helpful. You can do this. Data. For instance, if you have a web server or a web service that is sending you a notification whenever a product was bought, so like webhooks, you can just point it to a Lambda function and maybe transform the data and inform some other vendor about it. Like, all right, you need to actually submit or send this order to this person, and I'll take care of it with functions. And then you don't have to worry about Black Friday, because that's the only, like, the most important time of the year where all the companies are worried about if their system can handle the amount of traffic. I already mentioned this. You can just have someone send an email to an Amazon email address that you manage with email service, and then you can just reply or decide to put it in a queue. And again, chatbots. This is used a lot. So if you want to connect to databases, because there's no persistent storage, so you need to interact with other systems like queues, but most of the time it will probably be something like a database. And on the Amazon side, I can recommend looking at DynamoDB, which is a NoSQL storage database, or Elasticache, also supports Redis, which I'm a big fan of. And a new interesting product is Aurora Serverless. And Aurora is a MySQL compatible database created by Amazon. It's fully compatible with MySQL, but they created a serverless variant of it. So what it does, it just shuts down whenever it's not being used, just like with the functions. And so that means that if you have a visitor at 8 o'clock and it's your last visitor and the next one will show up next morning, then you're not paying for the idle time of your database, which is a really big thing. On the Google Cloud Platform, I've used Real-Time and Firestore. They are both part of the Firebase ecosystem, which I'll show you later. Memory Store, which also uses Redis. Data Store, which is also a NoSQL document database. And for persistent storage, I think everyone knows S3 and on Google they have cloud storage, and it's a fun fact that those are compatible. So Google made their servers later than S3, and they decided to make it compatible. So if you have a library that can work with S3, it should also work with Google. And for any other thing, there's a service for that. Like I mentioned, you have queues as a service, SQS, or you have a stream as a service. And you have a service basically for anything that you need. There are some limitations when it comes to functions. Like I said, they're stateless. So it should do one data, do something with it, and probably it should state some other storage. Like maybe it would write to a database or to a queue or to a stream, and that's it. Long processors are not supported. It's maximum. So that could, of course. From cold starts, and this is a big thing, because if your function isn't executed in a long time, they will just like put it in cold storage. So, and if you invoke the function, they first need to recreate the container, because in the background, functions as a service is mainly using containers. You need to do that, and the first request will be quite slow. This is pretty good. It usually takes like a few seconds. On Google, it can be way longer than that. And debugging can be hard. Event due. In Lambda, it's possible to create these events to test with, but still seeing this in the bigger picture, it can be difficult to get started with. Some tips and tricks when working with functions. Thing. So if you do multiple things, then probably it should be 2 functions. And functions usually do not call other functions. It could be, but usually there's some kind of message queue in between, or another system or a database. And you should avoid connection-based services. There's a typo there. But so, our serverless your function to. That's why usually document-based, the NoSQL-based databases are better suited for. And this also we found out, play with memory size on Lambda, and also recently on Google Cloud, you can set the amount of memory that your function is allowed to use. And how much more memory you use, it will cost you more money, which is a bad thing. But on the other side, the function might execute a lot faster because it has more memory. So you should benchmark it. Like you can, for instance, we did video rendering at some point, and when we set it to maximum memory, it was super fast. And eventually it was cheaper to have it set with much more memory, because then the duration was very short. So in the end, it saved us a lot of money, and the added benefit was that the user experience was even faster. You can pack it with binaries. So as I said, video rendering, you can just pack FFmpeg or ImageMagick, and you can just use that. So getting started with this, Google has a tool called Firebase, and it's actually, they call it backend as a service, and it's aimed at development. Great, they have SDKs for basically every platform, and they also have a great CLI tool. And currently they support Node.js 6 and 8, and also Python, which is still in beta, I believe. And they have a very, very generous free tier. So you can just have a gigabyte of storage, and you can have 1 million invocations of your functions every month for free. And you can use their real-time database for free. It's very nice. The only thing that you might need is to do outbound connections. So you are not allowed to call an API other than Google ones. So if you're using Drive, then it's fine. But if you want to use an external party, call them from your function, you're not allowed. And then you need to switch to a paid plan. But fortunately, they have a plan where you pay for what you use. And I will show you an example later where I actually had to do that, and I will tell you how much it would cost me. Also, Amazon is the biggest name when it comes to web services, and they basically started this thing of functions. Usually you would have to use separate services for it. You need to combine your own services that you would like to work with. They do support a variety of languages, so that's a lot more than Google does. They have a great web component. I'll show you type your code. It's very cool. And for model, which is into CloudFormation, so it's like a YAML CLI tool to make it easy to work. Many examples that there is in various. Also, they have a very generous free tier. If you create an Amazon account, there's a lot of stuff you get for free every month, but after 12 months it expires. But still you get invocations for free on your Lambda functions, which is very cool to just try stuff. They also recently announced a very cool thing called AppSync. It doesn't exist for a very long time. And just like Firebase, it aims at web and app, and they are basically working real time. It's all push-based. Offline. So if you are offline and someone edits a file and someone else does the same thing, then they would automatically try to merge. It's GraphQL from anywhere into DynamoDB. And with AppSync, you can just listen for changes. It's very powerful. This is for like news apps, games, or messaging. Binds things. Say that it's provided with Google and with Amazon of other providers. And to some extent this is true, like if you create your file. But as soon as you start using service, using SQS, then yeah, you can just not just move it to Google one-on-one. It's multilingual, so it supports Python and Node. It supports all the languages, very good. And it also supports local testing. So whenever you create your function, you can just test it locally on your own machine. And there's streaming logs available. So even if you push it to the provider, it will get you the streaming logs of the execution. So it's easier to see what's going on. Then PHP, because I didn't mention PHP yet. And we love to use PHP for everything. That's what we do. But it's not really supported on serverless providers, really. There is beta for PHP on Azure Functions. They support. We have used it, and it turned out not to be very stable. So my current recommendation would be not to go that route. Unfortunately, or fortunately, there's a lot of wrappers for Lambda, and they pack PHP as a binary. So there's like Node and Go wrappers, and they basically transform the request into something you can use in PHP, and then you would be able to use your PHP framework in a Lambda function. So as this is a Drupal presentation or a DrupalCafé, can you actually do serverless Drupal? I think in theory it would be possible to do this because there are wrappers with Symfony HttpKernel support, but I don't think you should be doing it. Another option would be to go with a static site generator, like Gatsby, for instance. What it can do is you create a React app and you just feed the data from Drupal into your app and create a static website out of it, and then upload it to S3, and then you have a static website that's super fast and you can't get hacked. It's really helpful. Or you could just use Drupal as a headless CMS. Just use it as a CMS. That's the only thing it does. It writes its data somewhere, and you have your functions read out the data. So some example architecture, and I think this will be the time that you will actually see why this is useful. So for instance, this is a static website. So at the left side, you will see the user, and it will just directly connect to all the servers that you're seeing. So it will, from front end, directly connect to your real-time database, and it will connect to your cloud functions, which is an API layer over HTTP. And it will also directly get data from Google Storage cloud storage. And sometimes you need to have some form, for instance. For this website, I needed a form where I would send whether you could fill in some data and then someone should receive it. And I just use Gmail for it. So I just validate the data in a function, and whenever the data is valid, I just send it with Gmail. That's it. Also, I had a gallery function on the website, and I hope this will show what it does. So whenever someone would, from the browser, an admin would upload a photo into the cloud storage, there's a function listing creations of new files. So whenever a new photo was uploaded, the function would take it, it would create a thumbnail, also put it in cloud storage, it would create a new entry in the database, and the database pushes real time to the user, and the user sees the instantly. And if you have a static site, you need to add some kind of functionality. Of course, you could be using Drupal, but you can also use things like Contentful, Prismic, or Flamelink is specifically aimed to work with Firebase. And then you can just edit your content in a service, an online service. And you don't need to manage, you don't need to manage any server yourself. Or for forms, you can use stuff like FormKeep or Typeform. Those are just services where you can create a form, a set of inputs, and just embed it on your website, and you have a form. Or e-commerce, Spotify is well known, and there's a lot more. Usually it's just a piece of JavaScript you need to include, and you have a web shop. Or authentication, Okta, Cognito, which is an Amazon service, and set them up to work with Facebook and Twitter, all the big companies, and then have login on your website. So this is an example. Is it all beer tight? It's about beer. I see Gabor laughing because he knows this. We use this in the company because we have beer time every Friday at 4:30. And I created a website for it like 10 years ago. And whenever I see some new technology, I upgrade the website. So this is version 5, and it's running on Firebase right now. So it uses the same functions as I showed before, but now there's also an authentication feature in there, so I can authorize admins, which basically is me, to log in with any of the providers you see on the right side, so Facebook, Twitter, Google. And on the top side, you see an API, and some other guys are using this on in the office to like power a phone app that we also have internally, so it also shows if it's beer time or not. And also the API is using Untapped, which is like an app where you can put in what kind of beers you drank before. And because this is an outbound connection, I'm actually paying for this, paying for the website, but it cost me like 6 cents a month. So that's basically nothing. And also at the top right or top left corner, you see there's a button, and I actually created. Not sure if you want to can see this on the stream. There's this button, and it's powered by a power bank, and there's a Wi-Fi chip in there. And if you put a key in there, because otherwise everyone would constantly push the button, and I would have to undo the beer time. So whenever you switch the key, it will connect to Wi-Fi, and the LED will switch on, and then you can press the button, and then actually it will call the API and make it beer time instantly. And the cool thing about this is that it's all push-based, which I can show you. So I'm here logged in. This is the website, the beer time website, and here's my tiny admin. And as you can see, there's a countdown timer, and now I'm deciding to change the time. Like, if someone actually seeing this at the office, they would be very excited right now. So I'm pressing save, and then demo gods, please. Right. Oh, I was logged out. Right. Logging in again using Google. Changing the time, hopefully. Of course, the demo gods are against me. Or it's the internet connection. No, of course it's not working. Because it was working. Oh, it switched there. But there you see it instantly changing. Now everyone would be really excited if they saw this at the office. So now I'm changing it back, and then boom, it's already changing. And this is just using push. And the same thing with the button. Whenever I click the button, it will go into override mode, and it will show, yes, we have beer, we can drink beer. So then everyone is really excited. So let's put this back. All right. So like I mentioned, this just cost a few cents a month. Oh, it's happening. There. So another thing I created is dynamic DNS. I got my own domain name, and I want to use VPN whenever I'm somewhere else. And I have a dynamic IP because I'm just a consumer, so I'm not paying for a business connection type. So I have a dynamic IP. So what I wanted to do is make sure that I always have a DNS record with the correct IP. So whenever my IP changes, I want it to be updated automatically. So I got a task on my NAS, which is my storage at home, and it's just pinging an endpoint every 15 minutes. I thought that would be sufficient. And then it goes through API gateway, and it just calls a Lambda function, and it just takes the IP and it updates the DNS records because it has my IP. And then at LeaseWeb, the hosting provider in this case, it will update my records, and it has a time to live of like 5 minutes. So when my IP changes, within 15 to 20 minutes, my IP is updated, and I can just log in to VPN again. And to show you how this function looks like, it's very simple. Not sure if you can read it. I think you can. Then the only thing I'm checking for a token, so just would be no one would be messing up my endpoint if they would know it. And then for every subdomain I want to have the IP, which is VPN, local, and home. I'm just calling LeaseWeb and update the DNS entry. Simple. It's just, as you see, 20 line of code. That's all there's to it. And also, this is very cheap to run. Oh. So a second one also on my NAS is document backups. So I'm using my NAS as primary storage to do all my to store all my documents, and that I love serverless. I'm also loving paperless. So I'm not using any documents at home. Whenever I get a document, I scan it high resolution with OCR. And then I'm uploading it to my NAS, and then every day it will just back up those changes to an S3 bucket. And because I'm really scared something happens to the bucket, then I wanted to know what changed in my bucket. So whenever a file is added to my bucket, I will invoke a Lambda function, and it will add the event that S3 triggered. It will send it to a queue, and every morning it will trigger another Lambda function. It will empty the queue, and it will just create a small email. So every morning I get an email saying like, all right, these are the changes in your S3 bucket. So maybe files were added, maybe files were moved, removed, and I would know about it very fast. Also, audio rendering. This is actually a project we had at work. We needed to do audio rendering. So a user went to the website, which is a static website. It's coming from S3, and in front of that was a CDN, CloudFront, and they would just get a storytelling mode, asking the user some kind of questions, and then during the process we would send a notification to API gateway with the parameters that the user entered, and then we would render an MP3 file, and it would be put on an S3 bucket. And because the browser already knew the file name because it was returned from the API function, they could just wait for the S3 for the file to be there on S3. So after like 10 seconds, it usually took like 5 to 10 seconds for the MP3 file to render. After 10 seconds, it would just ping S3, like does the file exist yet? And usually it already was, and then it could just play it. So the user just had to wait like a few seconds for this. It was near real time. And if the file's not there, it would just wait a few seconds and then try again. And we could just have 20,000, 100,000 visitors with this in a week. And we didn't need to worry about scaling. It would all scale up automatically and scale down automatically, which is also very important. So the client was only paying for the customer that actually went to do this. This runs pretty big. It's a game API that we're building. I can't tell for which client, but I think it's very, very exciting. It's pretty complicated, so let me know if it's not clear. So we have players. They're on a mobile app, iOS and Android, and they're communicating to us over HTTP with an API. So they can do various kind of actions. And behind the API is a Lambda function, and the Lambda function is getting its data, both content and player profile information, from a NoSQL database, which in this case is Redis. And whenever something changes in the app, we are making a record of the change, and we're sending that to an event stream. And there we have event handlers attached to the event stream. So there might be other handlers interested in these changes and might send an email or update a leaderboard or may send a push notification. So they could send back notifications using WebSockets to the actual device or create new events. Also, all these events are stored in an S3 bucket. So you can analyze the data later on to find patterns or see what kind of what day is most popular or anything. Also, the player is using a CDN to access all the static content like videos and images. And on this side, the bottom side, there's an admin, and they can use Elasticsearch. Also, all the events, I forgot to mention, all the events are pushed to Elasticsearch, and they can just query all the data that's coming in. So all the events that all the users are doing, you can just query on it and create a dashboard, like how many users are doing this in the past 5 minutes, for instance. And also we have content management. And as you see, this is in a red box because this part is not serverless. It's using Fargate, so it's using containers, and it's using Symfony framework for this with Sonata admin. But this could easily be Drupal. It's just a content management system, and it's pushing its data to Elasticache, so the API can read it, and it's pushing images and video. It's pushing those to S3. And on the right side, we have a cron. So we have a couple of crons running to make sure that all the data is pushed with a scheduler. So the CMS actually triggers certain content to be published. And the CMS itself is using a relational database. It's using MySQL to manage all the data. Then there's interesting thing. I showed it in the beginning to Gabor before the stream started. It's an auto-updating spreadsheet, and I think with this I can show you that serverless doesn't always have to be something that is really technical, or it can also have a really other weird purpose. So in this case, I will just first show you what it actually does. There's this friend of mine, and he loves to create spreadsheets when going to beer festivals, and he puts a lot of effort in that. But the downside is that he has to get all this data from this Untapped app. And so I created a small spreadsheet for him where he can just put in the URL of the beer, and then it would autocomplete everything else using a serverless architecture. So if I copy and paste the link, then you will see that it will change the URL into the ID. And then in the background, the data would be fetched from Untapped. And I think we're experiencing cold start here. Oh, there it is. And then it will update the sheet. So the only thing that he has to do is just copy paste a couple of URLs and his sheet is done. And still it's a lot of work because this is the sheet that he created a couple of weeks ago for an event. So there's like, it's still a lot of work, like 246 beers. But this saves him a lot of time. And the cool thing with this is it will get really fast if it's actually when it's warm. You can also put, if you're fast enough, you can put a lot of URLs in there and they will show up automatically. So what it actually, how it works is that Google Spreadsheets, I can actually show you that. On Google, there's also apps script. And it's just something you can, let me see if I can find it. Script editor. And there you can actually create scripts that are attached to documents. So here I'm just comparing all the IDs. I'm converting the URLs to IDs. And this is, they call it GScript, but it's basically JavaScript. And then I'm pushing it to Firestore. And in Firestore, I have a trigger that whenever there's a new entry, it will fetch the data from untapped. And whenever the data changes in the database, it's being pushed back to the sheet. And the cool thing with this is I was actually too lazy to actually build it. But I also have a database here which contains all this data that you're seeing in the sheet. And whenever I'm making a change here, I can actually show you that. DrupalCafé, update. Then there you see it changing. It's near real time. It's very fast. But the cool thing with this is that I can actually, I am able to, like there's a download function, so you can just export the spreadsheet. But there, I can also create a website and just read the data from the real-time database. And whenever a beer or data changes, or then it would be automatically updated. I think that's pretty cool. So if you want to some next steps, this is pretty next level. You can do workflows with step functions on Amazon or logic apps on Azure. And what you can do with this is, I hope the image is clear. Like what you can do with this is that usually a function does one thing. And it can't support long running. But what you can do is you can create workflows. So if there's an image incoming, this example, it will extract image metadata, see if it's a valid image, like we support JPEG and PNG, but maybe we do not support TIFF. You can say, all right, then it fails. But if it continues, then it will extract some data from the file. And then it might do recognition, which is a service from Amazon, where it will recognize like, all right, there's a person on the photo or there's the Statue of Liberty there. And simultaneously, in parallel, you can generate a thumbnail and also put that on S3. And then in the end, it's just done. But there are various outcomes. But this could be very helpful to do some kind of order handling. Like, all right, I'm getting an order in from a web shop and I want to put it there. And also I want to inform these guys. I want to send an email. And that's all stuff you can do with this. So it's like state machines, and it keeps track of every step. And you can also introduce something like human approval. So you can do all the steps and be done and send someone an email like, all right, you have 24 hours to actually approve this, and then accept or reject. And you can also define like, all right, if nothing happens, then this will happen. So it basically removes the plumbing. So this might save you a lot of creating queues. Another really exciting feature is Lambda at edge, and you can run all the functions, all the Lambda functions at the edge of your CDN. And so whenever a request comes in to your CDN, you can execute a function, or whenever there's a cache miss and it will call your origin, you can run a function. When the data is returned from the origin, you can run a function, or when there's a response, you can run a function. And this sounds really weird, but what you can actually do with this is really powerful. You, for instance, can do rewrites. So if you have a static website on S3, you can actually do rewrites or redirects if the URL is outdated, or change some headers. Like if the file doesn't exist on S3, it would maybe return an error, but maybe you just wanted to give a 200 OK because it's a single page app. You can do A/B testing, just read the cookies, see what person someone is. Are there A or B, and load some different URL based on that. Or do on-the-fly image resizing. This is really cool. You can just set some parameters like width and height, and then if the image doesn't exist on origin, you create it, and the next time it will be in cache. Or do authentication, like maybe verify if there's a token on your on the request, and if it's not, you can just return a 403 directly. So some conclusions. I think there's a lot of advantages. You focus on code. There's less logistics to worry about, so you don't have to worry about the servers. And you never pay for idle, only for usage. and it scales with use. But I think this is the most exciting bit, because I host the Beer Time website for 6 cents a month, which is nothing. And if I would have to get a VM somewhere or a droplet somewhere, it would at least cost me 10 euros a month. It scales with use, so if your service gets spike traffic, it doesn't really matter. And it's also fault tolerant, so you don't have to worry, like if I put the image there on the bucket and something goes wrong, Amazon will just retry it. If they have some kind of internal failure, they will manage that it will be retried. And I think it's pretty easy to get started with. If you use Firebase, for instance, it's like Lego for developers. It's really cool. Of course, there are some downsides. It's not always cheaper. Like for inconsistent traffic, it's very useful, but if you have a steady stream of traffic, then it could be cheaper to have the VM or the container. Also, cold starts can be really annoying. Can take sometimes, at Google I've seen it to take up to a minute. You need to learn new tools, possibly new languages. PHP is not supported. And eventually there probably will be vendor lock-in. All the providers claim there won't be, but if you're using SQS or they're using the tools that only this provider has, then it could be really difficult to actually change provider. And also testing and debugging can be annoying, and monitoring is different. It's just different. There's a lot of logs available, but you need to figure out the tools to actually use the logs. So in the end, you should use the right tool for the job. And it's okay to combine different tools, just like we did with the game API. Like we're using containers to run the CMS. That's fine. So that's it. I hope it wasn't too much information. Thanks for your attention. Are there any questions? Yes.
You talked about having, for example, to be cheaper to host an application on such services
Mm-hmm.
than having your own VPS. Does that mean that instead of having a booklet, it's better to use such tools?
So,
It's cheaper.
so the question is if it's cheaper to use functions versus a VPS, basically. Well, it depends. If you're running Drupal, it's very difficult to run Drupal, for instance, on serverless architecture. So then it wouldn't make much sense to go with functions. But if you're expecting spike traffic and it's a very specific thing that you need to do, then it could be way cheaper. So it really depends on the thing that you want to host. It's the same thing as Drupal. So it's not native, PHP is not natively supported. So, and there's a lot of tools to try to make it work. But personally, I'm not a really big fan of it. I think it's more cool that it is possible, but maybe not something you should actually do.
So it's something that whereby you have an application within another language. For example, JS and all those Java. It's cheaper to use these tools than using another language.
So the question is if it's cheaper to use the languages that are supported on functions versus languages not supported. Yeah, well, you can't run the languages there. So if you want to use functions, then I would really recommend to write it into the native language that is actually supported. So go with JavaScript, go with Python. Any more questions? From chat?
Nothing from chat.
All right.
I can ask something. Can you control the cold starts? Maybe people pre-warm some function stuff that you know that there is somewhere huge user load at 6 p.m. So you can say, okay, can you pre-warm the container so the first run will be not quick.
So the question is if you can pre-warm the container so there's no cold start like the function. Yes, you can. What you can simply do is have a cron set up with CloudWatch that will have a lambda that will call your function periodically. So like every 5 minutes and then, or 10 minutes maybe, and then it should stay warm. But I think in general, if your app is busy and it will be used a lot, then it will basically never go into cold start. So. All right, then thanks again.
Alrighty.
Use the clip.
I'm gonna clip again. Oh, good evening, everybody. Long time no see. A lot of people here. Tonight we will talk about setting up a multi-site with Docker4Drupal. Just a few words about myself, about me. I'm a backend developer, and as a backend developer, I mainly work with big sites where I really have to keep up consistency, functionality-wise, and I have to assure quality. Tonight's goal is to give you a small introduction, or just rather a small catch-up regarding what is Drupal multisite, what is Docker4Drupal, and well, how can you put it together, and how can you make it performant? About Drupal multisites. Why would you use it? I'm sure that most of you had a project like this. You have a big client, a big brand to handle. Somebody smiling there. All of us, basically. A big brand to handle where you had to make sure that the functionalities, the brand consistency is there through all the sites. However, the brand was so big that it was shared in multiple countries, and in every single country you have to alter it a bit while you are keeping the functionality intact as the same. So, for example, languages is a really good example for that. So, for example, if you would create a website for Netherlands, you would create it with two languages enabled, Dutch and English. It's the two most spoken language, I guess, here. However, if you would go to Belgium, it would be Dutch, English, and French, I guess. If you would go to UK, it would be only English. Setting up a multi-site helps you to set this up, to let your clients decide what do they want on their specific country-based website. Either it's an extra language or an extra piece of functionality. Mainly, apart from big brands, mainly government websites are doing this, or school websites, like university websites, where it's really important that everybody can get the same functionality and the same same themes oversight. It will give you a really good governance over the product because it shares the same code base across every single instances. So when, for example, you have a Drupal core update, a critical security update, you just update the code once, and all your subsites are being updated. The structure is very, you have one code base and you have multiple databases. Tonight I'm not going into details regarding how to handle multi-sites, how to handle the configuration per multi-sites. That will be for part 2. Docker4Drupal. Docker4Drupal was released back in 2016. Oops. And it comes with a lot of perks. First of all, it's Alpine based. It's Alpine Linux based. That means that it's the most compact Linux what you can get. With that, you can spin off a lot of containers, a lot of containers, which will only take a small amount of space from your local machine. It's highly optimized for Drupal. Currently, it supports WordPress 2 and Ruby 2, and the latest update says that it will hopefully go with Go 2, which is really nice. It's frequently updated. It's downloading the Docker4Drupal. you get 5 files. The .env file describes your environmental variables. This will be used when you are creating your instance, like what is your PHP version, what is your MariaDB version. The Docker Compose is the file which describes your ecosystem. So what kind of arguments will the PHP container take, what kind of containers you are going to use. The Docker Compose override file is, as the name suggests, it's for overriding. The Docker sync is a special snowflake. On on Macintosh, you will find issues with performance, with I/O performance. Docker sync is one of the solutions for attacking that problem. And you have a makefile. I think makefile is one of the most important part of the whole setup. The reason is, have you guys tried out Lando, DDEV, Doxa? Yes? You have a command line interface for all of them, which is basically solved with a makefile here. So instead of writing Lando site create or Lando up, here you would just say make. Cool. So you don't have to type a lot of Docker commands and therefore saving times. How to set it up? On Mac, there is 3 requirements. The DNS mask. With that, you don't have to alter your host file. I'm sure you experienced that, okay, you have to work on the same website or a multisite, and you have to add every single host entries to your host file. I'm kind of following the principle of, okay, don't touch the host file, leave it as is, but instead of that, set up a rule which takes every call to home to localhost. The other is Docker for Mac. I'm currently using the 18.03 version. That's actually the latest one, and the latest Docker4Drupal release. I would recommend always use the latest. It's very stable and it's frequently updated. What we are gonna use now, and yeah, I forgot to mention, but we will switch to code 2. We are gonna use a few images just to spin this whole thing up. Oops. While you are checking that, I search for my code. Yes, sir. Louder than this. Can you make me louder? Come on. Okay. Hmm? Well, if you dare. Yeah, because it's just one hit. Brilliant. Okay, while you are dealing with that, I would like to go on. The files what I mentioned earlier, what do you get when you download the Docker4Drupal? The .env file is a very well documented piece of work, and as you can see, you have all your project related variables in this file listed. it comes with a lot of options. Sure. Or maybe I can set it to... Do you remember where can I find the Command Plus maybe? Command Plus, let's see. No. All right. Is it visible for everybody? Awesome. It's all fine. It's less fine now. No, just leave it. It's stop. So you have a lot of options to choose from. Basically, they are supporting quite an amount of images. So when you are working on Drupal, most of our experiences is, we have the brand new shiny stuff sometimes, but we are mainly working on maintenance, so working on existing projects. It's a rare thing that you can just spin up a completely new project. If you have that luxury, you can just go with this, but otherwise, you can select your version, whichever is preferred to you. In the Docker compose YAML file, you have the wall. Oh yeah, of course. Visible? So wodby deliver you a very basic, very standard Docker compose YAML file with already a lot of things in it. So in the M file, if you remember, you had the MariaDB tag. It will add your project name as the container name, add some environmental variables, but the most important are commented out. What is good for do with the basic Docker4Drupal package is just to download it and run make. At the end of that process, you will have a Drupal 8 website or Drupal 7 based on what kind of image did you use. If you want to go more into detail, like, okay, it's nice, but I want to, alter it a bit, you have to dig a bit more. I won't go through the whole file. It's just way too long. It's 200 lines of code, and most of it's not used. I really like to keep things compact. Comments are not, I don't really like unnecessary comments. However, this is what you get by the base. Just one thing, on the volumes, you see a reference to the Docker sync. The Docker sync, including with the Docker sync YAML file, would describe a way of an synchronization between the host and the guest file system, and it's quite performant. However, based on previous experience, I think Sophie can confirm that, it's not really as stable as it sounds. For example, when you switch between branches, it tends to completely froze down or get confused or just not responding anymore. For that, if you want to make it work again, then you have to stop. You have to clear all your containers, all of it, which is at a multisite, for example, you have 70 multisite. That's a painful process. And then you have to remap everything, which on big projects can go from 10 to 20 minutes. And we just switched a branch. But for maybe for smaller projects, it really can be useful. For bigger projects, I'm not really recommending it. On the Docker Compose override file, you can add basic overrides. You can add basic overrides. This will literally just extend or replace what it and be done with it. So this will be the more powerful one. This will be the one which will be read last. And we arrive to the make file, which makes this whole thing very, very developer friendly. How many of you worked with Docker before, by the way? Most of us. Really nice. You know that when you work with Docker, you have to give out long commands, which is like really nice that you can type like on A4 long command, but it's a bit hard to read and hard to manage. Makefile gives you a solution for that. This is literally doing what Lando, DDEV, Doxal doing with their own custom CLI tools, but just a makefile. In this case, if I would type make in my terminal, it would pull all my images, and then it would spin up everything and during that removing any orphan containers which are still lingering around. Moving to the actual fun part, this was only to see the basic structure. When you try to set up a multisite with these images, you will face a few problems. One of the problems is that you are using multiple databases. Well, one solution is to spin up new database containers. But for example, with 70 sites, that would be 70 containers. You just don't want to do that. What you can do is using the entry point of the MariaDB. If you remember, or if you saw it, it's commented out in the general one. What happens here is when you run the make command, it will run the container for the first time. It will look into this folder and it will run whatever it is in that folder in the order as it reads. In my environment, I have this init MariaDB folder, and I have a default SQL command. And in the default SQL command, I'm just simply running an SQL command. I'm just creating different databases. This could be 2, this could be 20, this could be 400. Doesn't really matter. Oh, yeah. Exactly. Yeah. You are importing backups. You literally don't have to worry about the data synchronization. It's just there by the first time that you started. The other important thing here is the MariaDB volume. With volumes, you can make your data persistent. So when you are stopping your container, your state won't be gone. Your data will persist, and whenever you spin it up again, it will stay there. The exception here, of course, when you are when you're pruning your containers, because in that case you lose all your states, all your information, everything is gone. If it's not on your host machine. I did some experiments to synchronize the data itself to a physical file to the host machine, but it was very buggy. MySQL kept collapsing, so I decided just to use it like this. As you can see, there is a double point colon, a colon here, and after that, that a delegated word. This will only run for Mac, and this is the so-called user-guided caching, mostly. Mac. Nah, it's good. It's good. We will roll back for the user-guided caching a bit later. I altered a bit the PHP container. The alteration here, what you can see, is mainly two things. One is that I'm using a custom Docker file to build an image, to build the container. Actually, it's not that custom. All what I'm doing is that I'm opening it up for any other developers to come. Most of our projects has custom PHP libraries. For example, you have to export your pages in PDF. You have to have the HTML to PDF PHP library installed on your web server. By default, it won't. You won't have this library. To install it, you have to create a Docker file, because when you have the Docker file, from that moment you can do whatever you want on your container, on your Docker container. Downside of it, it has to be built, so that's some time what you are losing there. The other customization is the volumes. There is two main solutions for Mac. One is to just literally map your whole code base to the container, which is slow, like super slow. No wonder, because when you add up all the files, you have around 30, 40, 50,000 files per project. It's a lot. That's a lot of I/O, and there are techniques what you can use for user-guided caching, or more smart volume mounting. What you can see here is well, so far the best what I could come up with. It uses custom volumes. We will go down at the end of it, and while it's using the custom values, it's also using user-guided caching. So it's two birds with one stone. I'm using Mailhog just to make sure that I'm not sending out any sorts of email to anybody ever. I'm using Apache. I used to use Nginx. It was so slow, so surprisingly slow. I switched to Apache, and the response for every single local installation of the site became 3 times faster. It's really nice performance boost. Portainer, if I decide to look at the UI of the Docker setup what I have currently. Traffic is to hold the whole thing together. And since we arrived to traffic, as you can see here, it's a really important part. The basic Docker4Drupal installation does not come with traffic priorities. The reason why you have to set this, because you have to deal with a lot of websites and a lot of hosts. You can say just a simple rule for traffic to catch the incoming call. For example, the mailhog. So in this case, it would be mailhog dot whatever is my project is URL. However, it wouldn't catch it if I wouldn't tell it specifically that, okay, you have a bigger priority. So if it's priority 2, let me search for the priority, biggest priority. Yeah. It will first search for the portainer. Then it will search for mailhawk, and then the first priority, it will use a regular expression to cover all your incoming calls for your site. So just what does this mean? This means that so far you didn't edit any host file, you didn't add anything, and if you would create ashkere on in your sites and would add this entry to your sites.php, then Drupal and the whole ecosystem would be smart enough to figure out that, all right, so this is this subsite. Otherwise, it would fall back to default, so whatever is in your default folder. Alrighty, that was pretty much about the priorities. Regarding volumes, you're using volumes to make your data persistent. That's why you have to add MariaDB as a volume, so you would keep it up. However, you can also do more fun stuff with it, or more complicated things with it, such as setting it up the NFS support for volumes. This was released, by the way, for the Docker for Mac around April, beginning of April, end of March. For a strange reason, they weren't too loud about it. And with the user-guided caching, you finally have something stable and performant. How performant it is. I am on apple.localhost, and this is my single page load. Without the user-guided caching, without the NFS support, your page load would be around 5 to 6 seconds, which is like way too slow. In that case, you would even go back to using MUMP or using Vagrant. Yeah, yeah, the future. No, I kid you not. It was so terribly slow that that everybody would like to use something completely different, but this. But after putting these in place, it's super fast. Well, at least what I got used to so far. Of course, I'm yet to create my first Symfony application. Yeah, one more extra thing, and that's the Redis cache. Because so far I only optimized it on file level. But there is another part what you can do, and that's memory-based caching. So you won't hitting the databases over and over and over again, hence you are getting quite an amount of reading time. To do this, if you would use the default, here you are. If you would use the default image, you would just comment it out. It's not that big deal. If you want to make it persistent, though, so when you are stopping the container, it will stay there. So when you are spinning it up again, it will be there. So it won't have to go through the whole caching again. Then you have to just extend just a tiny bit with an extra command and with a volume. This you can make the cache itself persistent on your container. And I'm ran out of all the things what I wanted to say.
How do you negotiate domains? Like you mentioned this mask, JS mask. Yeah, that's what you use.
Yep.
So where do you declare the domains and the routing habits? Is pretty clever.
Well, I'm not declaring it anywhere, actually. I'm
So all requests they hit in Docker.
Yeah. Oh, the question was, repeat the question.
If I have like host site with 5 domains, host machine, how does it reroute all these requests to Docker?
The host machine will, so the question was that if you have 5 sites, how does the host machine reroute the request to Docker? And the answer is that it's using DNS mask. At the DNS mask, you create a configuration which says that, okay, take everything which ends with .localhost and push it to 128.0.0.1. That will be picked up by the traffic and will be sorted out based on the front-end rule parameter in the priority order. First.
And DNS mask configurations you keep inside of the project, or it's like separate?
Well, if you think about the question was that do we keep that in the project or
Or it's also outside?
is it outside? It's outside because it's more for your host machine itself, saying that okay, whatever incoming calls is ending with a .localhost, you want to push it without any further ado. You want to push it to a certain IP address. Of course, you can add custom rules too. I didn't really sunk into it. I just wanted one rule which push all my requests to a certain place. I set this up around a half a year, and ever since then my whole host is completely clean. I have to remember, I don't have to think, I don't have to do anything with it. I know that everything which ends with localhost will end up served by my host machine. Well, I didn't show the question part, but feel free to ask. Wow. Godverdomme. No. So, any questions apart? Yes, sir.
Yes. You showed a lot of stuff that was Mac specific.
Yes.
But also, is it compatible as is with Windows and Linux?
Sadly not, mainly because of the difference in the users. So on Linux, the default user is 1000, the default group ID is 1000, if memory serves me right. On Mac, it's 501 as a default user and 20 as a group ID. It's important to synchronize these IDs between the container file, container user IDs and group IDs. Otherwise, you will get all sorts of file permission errors that you won't be able to edit it. For that, actually, you have to use a different image for on Mac. As you can see, it's dev-mac OSX. Oh, yeah, of course.
Oh, right.
And
But
if
then
you
can make it compatible.
Of course. It's really project-based. You can set it up in a way that okay, you have one .environment file, but you are chaining up an override file, and you will read all together at once. So if you are on Linux, then it will be a Linux-specific image. If you are on Windows, then it's Windows, or it's Mac, then Mac. This user ID stuff, by the way, just an extra information, is a tricky one. So, for example, let's assume that you have a Mac, but your user ID on Mac is not 501. would-be images expecting 501 everywhere. So on the Drupal PHP image, here you already have this. You can change it, however, on the would-by base image, which is 3 layers down. Well, actually 2 layers down. I had a fun time with it, asking like, what the hell? Why is it not working? The reason why it didn't work, because my users weren't synchronized. But luckily, I have a Docker file. So I just went to my Docker file and said, all right, all fine, or all fine. It's all fine. I'm still using the Drupal PHP image. Basically, this is the base image. So if you wouldn't use Dockerfile, this would happen either way. I'm just making it sure that it happens, and on top of it will come the other. So I had to change the user ID on a Linux system, which was, since I never ever touched Linux, that was quite a fun thing to do. Apparently, you can install a package, Shadow, which has a command user mod. Awesome. You can change the user ID for a certain user, but that command only will change everything in the home directory. So all the files in the home directory, which were whatever user ID had the wodby user, will come with the new user ID. But that's just the home folder. You have a few other files too to make it sure that it will work. So you have to basically go over your whole container and replace all the 501s to 502s in my example. You don't even have to do this for Linux. You don't even. Yeah. Sorry. As is, but with certain alterations. So you, when you are preparing it for multiple environments, you will. Exactly.
Like if you have a dev on Windows and on Linux and on Mac all together on the same project.
Yeah, and of course you wouldn't have this on Mac. You on Linux. You also wouldn't use NFS support on Linux because why would you? It's crazy super fast either way. But with the override, you can say that okay, if I'm on Linux, then don't build the PHP, but use something else, just the image itself. So it's all about how you are putting it together. If it's too big deal of a change, then you can write a custom make command and say that okay, when I'm spinning up the environment, check my environment, check the right Docker file, load that, check the right environment file, load that, and spin it up. It's more about how you are playing with the files. All right, anything else? So the question is that performance would stay. Yeah, so the question is that would the performance stay as is if you spin up different projects, so not just containers but different projects. It has limitations too. So if you check your
Can you run multiple Docker machines at one time, or just this machine?
okay, so first, yeah, multiple projects. So that's actually answering the same question. You can, as long as you have resources for it. You of course you have to set up traffic in a different way. saying that, okay, if a request like something comes in, then serve it from here or serve it from there. Actually, Docker Compose comes with an example. Docker for Mac Drupal comes with a example traffic where you are saying that, okay, you are defining different. Okay, who didn't show this to me so far?
Everyone.
You will dream about it.
Right. So identifying different networks, you add this network to your container, and with that traffic we'll know, okay, so whatever is in my front-end rule, I will serve it through that particular network. Does it answer your question? Well, no, that's actually answer your questions. Your questions, yeah, you can spin it up to a certain level, as long as you have enough resources.
So say you have to set up a bunch of different ones, and you got a bunch of different traffic configurations that are spawned or active, and you get so the traffic router.
Great question. I'm not sure what's the answer there. I haven't been on that part yet, but actually traffic promises that yeah, you can do exactly like that. That you can set up just one traffic file, and the rest will be done. But in that case, it depends how you are structuring your whole projects. And also, if you, I think it's very I think it's very sorry.
It might be fine on the first one, but then 10 projects later, you go back again.
In Linux, it's not possible. In Linux, you need to stop one project and to run another. But it's just make up and that's it basically.
Yeah.
So you just yes.
Yeah, you can certainly, by the way, make it work that you are running multiple projects at a time, but I think it's very rare that you would like to run more than 2 projects at a time. I mean, I'm just thinking about the use case. No, at the
Sometimes we work in several
at the
projects.
no, I mean at the that okay, that basically means that you are in the very same time work on 2 projects. The use case what I can imagine for that
It's every day.
Welcome to my day.
it's every day. But in general, at least how I would think, you would only use one project that, okay, I did this on this project, it works somehow, and I want to get that functionality on my other project. Or unless you have a very fun project manager.
3 in front of you.
You need monitors.
Monitors, yeah.
Sometimes I manage to run 2 projects at a time, but sometimes it doesn't work. It will be bad.
It will get better. But yeah, it's a custom rule what you need to set up, just for interesting part. Why did you do this?
And did you do maybe benchmark comparing to the man?
Yeah, I did.
So
Honestly, only
results.
visual. Like, okay, how does it feel to work with? Because that was my own scenario, saying that, okay, as a developer, I do not really want to think about how my local environment is set up. I just don't, because at the end of the day, I'm a backend developer. I'm not a DevOps, not at all. So all of these stuff was trial and errors, reading documentation, reading articles. As a backend developer, I'm whatever. I don't want to think about it. I just want to run one single command, and then everything will be up and running and there, and it will work as expected. And the rest can be worked by on DevOps-oriented people. I just don't want to deal with it.
Or hand it over to someone.
So my
You have to catch them.
so my question was, what is the faster at the end? Just
Docker.
performance-wise.
Currently, the question was, what is the faster at the end on Mac? currently, if you have NFS support, right configured NFS support, and sorry,
And Apache instead of Nginx.
and yeah, and Apache. Well, I'm sure that you can configure Nginx to be performant, but DevOps. It's really way faster than MAMP. So, for example, actually, I can show it. But I don't have MAMP, so I cannot show that. Let's go to the shell. And I'm already in my container on the PHP shell. Oh, this installation comes with Drush 9. I highly recommend you use Drush 9. So I would just rebuild the cache. What I showed previously. No, live demo.
It's good. Next time it's faster.
Nope. Yes, it is.
See? That just saved me like
Yeah, but by the way, that's was my experience with Evolve. I stop the containers, even though that I put all the persistence in it, and if I spin it up again, the first click, the first command, the first everything will take some time. But that was the Redis question, by the way. Could it be a connection there? But after that, it's really fun to work with. Oops, not this. Control E.
Do you also use the same containers in production?
I'm not there yet, and I would say that you definitely wouldn't use the same ones. These are especially created for development environment.
whenever like a dev flag and you can just sort of toggle off and verify. That's a nice set.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, you wouldn't want to build your image or your container on production. You just want to pull your image, which is if you are in a development environment, you have the Docker file. You definitely don't want to do that. To get around it, you can just create your own custom image and push it to Docker Hub.
You have this on GitHub? Yeah.
Hmm?
You have this on GitHub?
I do.
Let me just create that.
Okay, guys,
Let me just
we will
delete.
answer to your question but before you have to close.
All right. Just two quick response,
Okay.
right? Yes, there is an example on GitHub, and regarding the user-guided caching, very short. The main issue is the amount of files that it's being read. With the right user-guided caching, you can say that okay, this is for this is cached, this is delegated, this is not delegated. You can fine-tune the whole thing. But when you have the NFS installed, well, you don't have to do anything. It's well, I can share this later with you. It's cleverhoods/sf site factory.